Hey Shereen, hi, welcome to City and to this session. I think we're very excited to have you on board. I think most of us have seen you, followed your work over the last 2 decades. So it's great to have you with us a little bit more up close and personal. And interestingly, it is a reversal of roles, Shireen, where I'm going to be asking you questions. So, you're going to be in a different place this time. So I hope you also enjoy the conversation. But first, let me welcome you, Shri. Very nice to have you here. Um, and I can see that you have a very interesting backdrop. Is that your newsroom, I guess?
That is our newsroom, Ridla. Thank you so much for making me a part of the Diversity Week, and thank you to Citi for inviting me to be part of this. And you were talking about the role reversal. I cannot tell you, I'm itching to ask you about what you think is going to happen to the rupee, considering the fact that we've already touched a record low today. So I'm waiting to actually put my journalist hat back on and ask you the questions as opposed to doing the answering. But thanks so much. It's an absolute pleasure. And yes, this is our newsroom. This is where I live pretty much through the day, and I have been here for the last 20 years, and it is home. It's a second home.
No, yeah, it looks nice, very vibrant, and the vibe is like wonderful. So thank you again, Shirin, for being on this talk with us. As Ashu said, the International Women's Day theme for this year is breaking the bias. And personally, I think it is a very critical theme because so much of what we want to do is today not able to happen because of conscious and unconscious biases that people have, right? Both men and women equally. And if we were to kind of take care of these biases, I think all that we want to do can get accelerated to a very, very large extent. So I personally like the theme for IWD this year. And I think it's very relevant for us to have you here because, we are all from the banking and finance industry where I think there is a lot more opportunities for women, even from the time when I started, like about 2 decades ago. But you started in a very, very different industry. And at least the outside perception is it may have been more difficult for women in the media industry. So I think it'll be great for us to just start off by hearing from you on how your journey has been. Have you faced these kind of biases and how did you overcome all of that? So we could just kick off with that, Shireen.
Sure. Thanks very much, Midula. I have to say that at the very outset that I'm one of the lucky minority, and I choose those words very carefully because, I had parents who believed in what I wanted to do. I came from a very privileged background where my father was in the Indian Air Force. So we really never had any conscious or very obvious gender lens or class lens or religion lens. I've grown up on Air Force stations across the world, and my world was really this very homogeneous sort of environment where, we were this large extended family where, we celebrated every festival with equal amount of gusto and enthusiasm. We all craved for, the very basics. If somebody was going abroad and got us back sketch pens, it was like, or Toblerones, it was the high point of our lives. So we really grew up in that environment where it was very equal. And, through the course of my education, it was actually my mother who would constantly push me to say, look, you need to, get your master's degree, and what are you thinking about that? So not having a career was never an option as far as I'm concerned. But again, I go back to my point that we are the lucky minority because a large part of this country and a large part of South Asia continues to believe that women don't have the choice to negotiate their careers and their lives on their own terms. You talked about the television business and the broadcast journalism business, and I'm very lucky because pretty much like banking and financial services, broadcast journalism has been a little more equal, and especially English broadcast journalism. So I would say that when I started my career 20 years ago, I didn't find it that hard to break in, and I didn't find it that hard to move up. It was a different story when it came to having broken in at the very top and then trying to sort of make my voice heard as far as decision making was concerned. That was a different story. But I don't believe that I had to face the challenges of being marginalized or being kept out or or being denied opportunities. So we were very lucky. But when I do speak with my colleagues who are not in the English-speaking press, and especially not on the television side, but people who are working as stringers and people who are working with regional media, it's a very different story, because let's be very honest and clear, and I think that is important for us to acknowledge the reality that there is a patriarchal system, that there are biases, and these biases exist. There is a social conditioning that holds women back, and that is a reality as of today. We can wish it away, we can choose to ignore it, but I think as leaders, we must understand and acknowledge the fact that this is a reality. It's a lived reality for many, many women. And we need to start to design our solutions, our interventions, our policies, keeping that reality in mind. Because if you believe that, Delhi and Bombay constitute the large lived reality of women in this country, then we're completely barking up the wrong tree, because that is not the truth. And I think that is very important. So the last 20 years have also been a journey for me to acknowledge the fact that my life was very different from the lived reality of many other women. And for me to then be able to understand what it must be like to walk in their shoes. And this takes me back to a conversation that I had with Satya Nadella a few years ago, where he talked about the importance of empathy. And he believes that leaders must have, besides all the other attributes, must have empathy. Because if you cannot understand what it takes to live in somebody else's shoes, walk in somebody else's shoes, then you're not going to be able to design solutions keeping their desires, needs, expectations in mind. So I think that has been a process for me. And I have to say that it's helped me understand the world better. And it's also helped me understand how, as leaders, we can make change, how we can nudge change, albeit slowly. But that really is something that I have learned to understand. And, I just want to highlight the fact that this is an important conversation to have, not just today or around Women's Day, but it's an important conversation to have every single day. And why do I say that? Because let's take a look at the data. And while you and me are having this conversation today, let's acknowledge the fact that this is not just an Indian problem. It's a global problem. If you take a look at the latest World Bank statistics, 2.4 billion women globally do not have the same economic rights as men. And that is the reality today. If you take a look at the gender gap report that the World Economic Forum puts out, it will take 136 years to close the gender gap worldwide. So this is a conversation that we need to have, not just on one day of the year, but it's a conversation we need to have every day. And just like we've seen with the cause of sustainability, till about 5 years ago, sustainability was tucked away at the end of the annual report as part of the CSR disclosures and so on and so forth. But today, sustainability is driving business strategy. Sustainability is, in fact, the strategy for many companies. It's no longer a CSR, to-do. And I think that is exactly what needs to happen as far as diversity and inclusion is concerned. It cannot be tucked away to the last chapter of an annual report. It cannot be in the realm of corporate social responsibility. It has to be core business strategy. So I'll stop there and then come back to you for more.
No, I love the passion with which you're talking on this topic, Shereen, and this makes me feel that it's something very close to your heart. And what you said is so true, that some of us, I think, have been privileged to have the right childhood and right parenting and people who gave us the opportunity. But there are so many more who don't have that, right? And we have to fight every single day to get that equal opportunity. And what you said about Satya Nadella is so true. I think he has been an inspirational leader who gives so much importance to this. So thank you for sharing that with our viewers. Just Shereen, just at a practical level, if you have to give advice to women, and we have all age groups of women in organizations, both yours and city, how do you think we should go about bridging this gap, as you said, right? This gender gap, either around pay, performance, all of that. Either as a society, as an organization, what are your thoughts on what we should be doing? And I'm sure you in your personal career have dealt with these situations and have taken a lot of steps. So Shereen, it would be great for you to share your thoughts with us.
Well, thanks, Midula. I don't think that there are easy answers to this issue, but I think what we need is a very clear plan. I think we need to ensure that this is something that, as I pointed out, is part of an organization's, targets. an organization's goals, an organization's vision statement. I think without that, it's not going to be possible for us to be able to bridge the gap. And there have been, as I said, there are no easy answers and no easy solutions, but there has to be a constant effort to rethink or review decisions. For instance, when SEBI had decided that they were going to mandate the representation of women on Indian boards, I have to say that when that decision was taken, I was perhaps a little uncomfortable because, it goes back again to that notion and idea of, do we really want to address this issue via reservation and so on and so forth. But, today I can acknowledge the fact that if that hadn't happened, if there wasn't that stick approach that had been taken by the regulator, we perhaps wouldn't even cover the ground that we have managed to cover today. And by the way, the ground covered is not particularly great to speak of, but at least we've made some progress. So I think, again, even in my own head, I have tried to review my positions and see what has changed around us. And, I think that it's an evolution that as leaders, as organizations, we have to acknowledge. I'll go back to several of my conversations that I've had with women leaders over the course of the past 2 decades. And I think there is, we saw this debate rage on over the last few years that, are women leaning forward enough? Are women leaning in enough? And which was the Sheryl Sandberg school of thought, saying that, look, as women, we need to push forward. We need our voices to be heard. We need to make our presence felt at the table. And there was another argument saying that, look, it's perhaps a disservice to women who are trying their best to move forward, but because there are so many thresholds, so many barriers, they tend to hold themselves back. They tend to fall behind. So I think we have to find a middle ground between can women have it all, and what can women have at what stage and at what point in life, and what can organizations and leaders do to ensure that you can strike that balance. And I think that has been something that I've personally been working on for the last several years. I think we need to move away from, or not move away, but I think we need to reimagine concepts like only having maternity leave. I think many organizations have moved forward with saying paternity leave should be an entitlement as well. I mean, why should a father be denied the time to spend time with a child, or why should the father not also take on some degree of the responsibility? Should there be more family leave? Let the family as a unit decide what works best for that particular family. Should the wife take time off? Should the husband take time off? Let that decision be taken by the family unit. And this is something that Indra Nui and I spoke about a few months ago when she released her book. And, she talked about how while we talk about maternity leave, etc., we don't talk about geriatric care enough. We are now in a situation where parents require attention, parents require help. And again, the responsibility always seems to fall on the woman. So you see many women opting out, not just because of maternity, but also because of this life stage and the responsibility that this life stage brings on board. So do organizations now need to think about life cycle, not just about paternity or maternity? And I think these are things that are evolving. For instance, I mean, the idea and the notion that you can avail of maternity leave even if you go in for adoption. I think these are progressive policies that also tell us that we need to break away from stereotypes. We need to break away from the templates that we have gotten used to, because the world is changing. Choices are different. People are living differently. And I think that has to be acknowledged. And that is why I truly believe that organizations have to be living, breathing organisms that change along with the changing times and focus on what is changing around us and the choices that are changing as well.
You bring about a very interesting point, Shereen, on how we need to rethink, I would say, at things holistically, right? Just going beyond maternity and other aspects, which traditionally, for God knows how many years, we just stuck to the same templates. And I think COVID has taught us a few things, right? At least I would say the bias against work from home is probably kind of gotten diluted a lot because of COVID. And that's a good example of how we can rethink some of these, foundational principles that we followed for ages together. Just staying with this whole what we've seen in the last 2-3 years, I think women are coming back into the workforce. They are sort of making that transition. What has been your experience with women in your organizations? How have you worked with them to retain them, to encourage them to come back into the workforce? That'd be interesting to see how it has happened in your world.
Well, I have to say that this is something that I'm particularly passionate about, and we have a lot of women who work at CNBC, and I'm sure if you watch the channel, you will see that that's pretty evident and obvious. And I have to say that I'm particularly proud of the fact that we've had pretty much zero attrition when it comes to losing women at the maternity cycle, because that is when people decide that it's just too much, it's too hard to balance, and this is a business that requires long hours. It's a business that requires you to be on call 24/7. It's as close to law enforcement or the medical profession. Just to give you an example of the kind of commitments that you need to make as far as your personal time is concerned. And so it's not easy. But I think to start with, what I've been absolutely clear about personally and as an organization is to let the women know that, look, we value you as assets. This is a choice you're making. I'm not going to put pressure on you to decide between this or that. I'm going to try and facilitate that you can have both. And it has worked really well because they appreciate the fact that they feel valued, they feel appreciated, they feel wanted. I think part of the problem is that as soon as somebody says that, look, we're heading towards maternity leave, the organization starts to diminish their role. Consciously or unconsciously, you just stop giving that person responsibilities, new projects, and so on and so forth, because you're thinking about the future. That, 9 months down the line, I'm not going to have the access or the time to be able to, to take this on. So the organization starts pulling back, and I think that's wrong. I think we need to ensure that, look, this is not a disease. It is a choice that an individual is making. And so how can organizations step up and ensure that you can make that choice happily? How can you be actively an active participant in this individual's journey? And I think we've done that. I mean, the mandatory maternity leave is 6 months. I mean, all of us, have to comply with that. But outside of that, how do you make it easier for them? Can you be a little more flexible on where they work from, how many hours they work? I mean, through the course of COVID, for instance, for almost 2 years, a large part of our workforce moved to work from home. Me and a few other people were continuing to come into office through the course of the pandemic because we couldn't allow the studios to go dark completely. But we were very clear that, people who have small kids, men and women and infants, we don't want them to come into work till the time that there is absolute clarity and certainty on where the virus and the pandemic is headed. So those are conscious decisions that we made along the way to ensure the safety and security of our people. But again, just to go back to the point that you were making about biases, and I'm glad that you talk about breaking the bias, because I think sometimes organizations mean to do well and their policies are well-intentioned but actually have the opposite impact. I'll give you an example. At the time, pre-pandemic, everyone was sort of tightening up budgets, and everyone was dealing with constraints because we already had an economy on the decline, and so on and so forth. And so these are operational issues and operational decisions that organizations need to make on what benefits do you cut. And many organizations did cut down on travel benefits, for instance. And so there was a policy that we put in place saying that, look, if you're traveling for an assignment and it's past 10 p.m., then only the women will be able to avail of transportation that is provided by the office. Otherwise, make do of public transportation, Uber, Ola, so on and so forth. And that would automatically bias the leader to say, look, let me not send a woman on this assignment because it's going to then end up meaning more logistical costs and so on and so forth. So I think organizations, while trying to do well-meaning things, can sometimes create even more biases. So this is something that we need to be mindful of. This is something that we need to watch and watch very carefully. But I think it's an everyday learning, and I think we need to incorporate as much feedback, real time feedback, real life feedback as possible that we can get. And so that's really been how we've managed to ensure that we've kept zero attrition at the maternity phase, and we've got all of these women back and raring to go and committed to sort of give their very best, because they didn't feel like they had to make a choice between having a career or having a child. And I think that's very, very important. And it also goes, as far as women are concerned, we carry guilt all the time. I mean, Indra Nui telling me that if she had to print a T-shirt for herself, it would say, "I'm guilty." And, so this is the woman who reached like the pinnacle of corporate success in corporate America. And she's telling you that every day of her life, she felt guilty about either not being a good enough mother, not being a good enough daughter, not being a good enough wife. So these are things that women we're guilty of it. We're guilty of pressuring ourselves. We're guilty of not asking for help because we think that that'll make us look bad and it'll make us look needy. But I think we need allies. We need support. You need a network, men and women. And I don't think it's easy to do it by ourselves. I think there's no shame in asking for help, and there's no shame in reaching out to people. And the last thing that I want to leave with everyone who's watching is that, look, we spend about 90% of our time thinking about how we're going to be judged by the outside world. We're always looking at external validation. People are going to judge you no matter what. So, live your life the way that you want to live it. Make the choices that work for you and work for the people who care about you. The judgment will happen anyway. There's nothing that you can do to control it. So, just live your authentic life as best as possible. That's really all you can control. The rest of it is beyond our control anyway. So that's what I'm going to leave it with.
That's the last piece that you mentioned, Shereen, is such wonderful advice, because always felt that some of the biases is inside our head, right? Because we keep judging ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves because we want to go out and prove it and make a name for ourselves, so that women, and this constant debate of whether you're going to have it all or you cannot have it all. I think some of this probably we can put it aside, and therefore the allies as a concept and as a network is very important. And I'm going to come to a very important thing, which is the male allyship, right? And we still work in both our industries. There is still a large portion of men who are driving policy and performance metrics and all of that, right? And you have often spoken about having very strong male allies. I think you've spoken about Raghav being such a great mentor to you and guiding you through your career. And so has it been in most of our careers, that we've all had strong male bosses or colleagues who have supported us. So there are a lot of men also listening to us. So what is your advice to them on how they can be part of this journey? What is male allyship all about? And how, without feeling that they are being discriminated, how can they be part of this strong movement, right? So yeah, your thoughts will be interesting.
I think at the heart of any allyship, whether it's female to female or male to female or any other, it has to be based on mutual respect. It has to be based on trust. It has to be based on open communication. I mean, these are the cornerstones of any healthy relationship, right? And I think that is what we need to encourage. I think we need to encourage open conversation. We need to encourage consistent dialogue. Again, what I see very often is that, people will engage on this issue and then forget about it till the next time there is an event or there is some sort of a report or so on and so forth. But I think, you need to continue to have this conversation as an ongoing dialogue. And very often, and I've noticed this because, the sort of invites pour in every Women's Day. And I've noticed that, you end up speaking to other women. And I think that's part of the problem, that, we have made this a women's issue. It is not a women's issue. It is an issue that requires all stakeholders to come to the table, and that includes the men. It must include the men. So I think I'm starting to see that change, but still I feel like, diversity and inclusion, it's it's the same camp speaking to each other, when what we need much more of is a dialogue with the others as well, with the other side, so to speak, if I could call it that. Because what you want to do is to align expectations. What you want to do is to align the vision. And if you're all on different boats, it's going to be very hard for us to actually have a common meeting point. So I think that is really the start of it, is to have a conversation with everybody, not just address women's issues with women. I think, even as far as the media is concerned, and this is something again that I have been thinking much more of in my head. You must have seen this viral photograph yesterday of the Pakistani cricketer Bisma Waroof, walking towards the ground with her cricket kit and also her little baby, and everyone went to town saying, well, look at this. This is a symbol of empowerment. It's a symbol of female emancipation. It is all of that. But at the end of the day, does it also pressure women to constantly be part of that hustle? And I remember I was doing this show when the Bumble CEO, and she was 31 then and decided to take Bumble public. Whitney Wolf Heard, and she was the youngest woman to take her company public. And she rang the bell with her infant in her lap. And to me, that was, again, and the video was captioned by the Bumble team as, this is what leadership looks like. And when I watched that, I said, my God, this is such a powerful statement. It's, and I felt elated, excited watching that. But a few days later, I was having a conversation with some women entrepreneurs, and they saw it differently. They said, look, this also puts a lot of pressure on women to live up to this notion that you can and you must have it all and do it all. So does it create unrealistic expectations of other women as well? And I'd never really thought of it that way, because I saw it as, here's this strong woman who's been able to sort of get to the pinnacle of success, and she's done it, and what a statement to be making. So I think we need to be much more mindful of the messaging. I think we also need to be mindful of the fact that, look, everyone may not necessarily have the resources or the network or the support system to be able to achieve what some of these women have been able to achieve. That doesn't make their journeys any less important. It doesn't make their contributions any less valuable. But I think we need to be aware of the fact that there are different realities, and we need to acknowledge that as we move forward. So I think, this is how I'm sort of processing, and there's so much to process, because every day you come up with a new dilemma that you don't know how to deal with, and you really have to constantly be thinking on your feet and evolve your strategy to deal with how quickly things are changing around you. I was on a panel many years ago, and that's really what got me started to do a lot of the programming around these issues on CNBC, because one of the panelists said, look, who are the role models for women in India? It's either Mother Teresa or Katrina Kaif. There's nobody in between. And so that's what forced me to acknowledge the fact that I'm somebody in the media. It should be my job, or at least I should attempt to do the job of telling the stories of women who fall between Mother Teresa and Katrina Kaif. And that's how we started a program called What Women Really Want, which was about regular women who moved up the corporate life cycle. It wasn't just about the CEOs in the top, and it was about addressing some of these real issues and some of these real challenges, and trying to understand how companies are dealing with that and share the playbook. So I think it really comes down to a lot of the sharing of our playbooks, sharing of our experiences, sharing of our learnings, and hopefully we will be able to to put pragmatic policies in place.
Yes, and as you said, it's such a dynamic world that things are changing, some of them for the better, right, from the times when we started off, and a lot is changing for the better. And I'm just going to change our track a bit here, because I have a lot of faith in the millennial population, the young generation, to be able to just change the way we have looked at some of these concepts traditionally for so many years, right? They have the power, they are more inclusive, they are open-minded. But just coming back to how they need to deal with their career, they're also, I think, very passionate. They want to create an impact. and they want things very quickly, right? So if I were to kind of give an advice to the millennials on how they should be looking at their career, and this is more career advice along with, how they need to address some of these social issues, if I can call them, in the workplace, what would it be? Like, how should they kind of look at their career?
Whenever I speak to somebody and I meet them for the first time and they ask me, how long have you been working at CNBC? And I say 21 years. And then everyone's like, oh my God, 21 years. Like, what's that about? So, and, to me, I have to say I was very fortunate and very lucky to have been able to marry my passion and purpose. And my passion was storytelling, and my purpose eventually has been to be able to tell stories that change the world, impact the world, or just document the world. I mean, I don't want to sound pompous and say, we're attempting to change the world, etc. But, at least we tell people what is happening in the world to the best of our ability. And so I was lucky because I was able to find this convergence of passion and purpose. And I think that's really what it's about. I mean, the money and all of that is a byproduct of the work that you put in, and it will happen. It will happen over time. You have to have the patience. I keep telling people, when we're going through our hiring process, I asked them, I said, are you doing this because you want to be on television? And if the answer is yes, then, that's, for me, that's a clear no. Because being on television aspect of it is really the, it's the finale, the grand finale of a lot of the dirty work that goes on, the blood, sweat and tears that you have to sort of go through before you actually get to that point. So I think, and I tell people who we are sort of talking to in terms of, and millennials who we're hiring, is that, look, you've got to do the time. There is no other way out of it. You have to do the time, and you have to be clear about what is it that you want. To give you my example, for instance, very early on in my career, I was very clear about the fact that I would try and learn as much as possible. So I didn't say no, and maybe that was another extreme where I chose not to say no to everything that came my way, because in my desire to sort of learn as much as I possibly could. But it helped me, because it helped me understand what works for me. It helped me understand what my skill, where I can best utilize my skills, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses. And I think that's an approach that I always tell people, that try and do more than is your KRA, because that will help you understand what you're good at, what your vulnerabilities are, and where you need to do some more work. And I think, I truly believe that in any organization or in any workplace, the power of collaboration is quite something. It can be magical, and I've seen that happen here. I don't believe that workplaces work well for the lone rangers. I think that can only take you so far. I think you have to take people along. You have to collaborate. You have to learn to work together. You have to learn to be invested in somebody else's success and not always only clamor for personal success and personal achievement. I can very happily today say, without absolutely any doubt, that what gives me more happiness today is to see a younger colleague do a great interview, do a fabulous show, as opposed to me doing a great interview or a good show. So I think that is something that I believe that, if you want to have a lasting career, these are things that you need to work on. You need to work on the fact that it's not just about you, and it shouldn't always be just about you. It needs to be about people that you work with as well, and equally, you have to push people around you, and you have to learn and be inspired by the achievements and the success of people you work with as well. So I think, collaboration, I think communication, dialogue, and understanding your purpose and your passion, I think those are things that go into building a career. And I see very often, these days, I think it's also different circumstances, right? When we were growing up or when we started our careers, I don't think I had the audacity or had the confidence to walk up to my boss and say, oh, I'm only going to work for 8 hours, or I'm only going to work for 10 hours, and this is not my KRA, or I'm burnt out and I need a sabbatical. I didn't have the confidence or the audacity. I see it happening all the time today, like literally every other day. So, you can say, oh, generation gap and whatever. But again, it's a reality that you need to acknowledge, because there are just that much more choices available for people to exercise today. I mean, it's a different approach in their heads, and so to wish that approach away is again being in denial. You're living like an ostrich. So you have to acknowledge the fact that, hey, they think differently, they want differently, they expect things from their life differently, their timelines are different, and so how can you adjust to that? And there has to be a very clear, I think, what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable, and that each organization or each leader has to draw that line. But I think there has to be an acknowledgement that it is different, and so to pretend that and we're just not going to accept what is happening today or how things are different today is not going to work for us. It's not going to work for them. So I think we need to adapt, and we need to be a lot more agile. I think the pandemic has taught organizations the importance of adaptability and agility. And I'm so glad that it has. I mean, it's a hard lesson to have learned courtesy of pandemic, but I'm glad that organizations today, post the pandemic, are at least acknowledging the need to be much more adaptable and agile. So I think that's really where I would say the conversation with millennials or whatever else the next gen is needs to happen. And as leaders, we need to acknowledge the fact that they see the world differently. And so we can't pretend that they don't.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice. And I hope all the young people who are tuned in to this program are listening. I guess what Shereen says is important. You have to do your time, and often you just see the success and you see the successful faces. Behind that, there is a lot of blood and toil and sweat. But also, Shereen, I like the point that you're making, that it's a two-way street. So we need to adapt as well, because times have changed, and we need to kind of get to their level and understand what they're trying to say. So very good advice for both parties to kind of take note of. Shereen, as we are kind of winding up, I think a few things that I wanted to understand from you, which I get asked to all of us often, right? Like, how do you balance? Like, how do we keep sane in this stressful environment, personal, professional, mental, body health, all of that, right? So what sort of advice can you give to everyone who's tuned in today? Because you're in like great spirits, great balance you maintain. So, yeah.
I don't know about that. In fact, I think I would be remiss in not admitting that I think that I've done a pretty poor job in balance, because I think a large part of my life has really been about building this brand, has been about building this newsroom, and because it's given me so much joy and a great degree of satisfaction, I don't resent it, and I'm not bitter about it. But I think that if I could do things over, I would not have made as many personal sacrifices as I think I have. I mean, and it comes back again to, I think it is also a little bit of a gender thing. I think as women, we always tend to think of ourselves as last. And I've heard this from a lot of very successful women, that, if there was a choice to be made between, do you need to do work, or do you need to, do something for your parents or for a friend or whatever, it would, or should I just cancel my yoga class? I can bet you 100% that you would cancel your yoga class, so that's just the reality. And it's my reality, and it's a reality of many, 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 many women that I've spoken to. So I think we need to be comfortable with the idea of prioritizing ourselves. And I think we've gotten so used to and conditioned into believing that if you choose something for yourself, it's being selfish, and it's being self-indulgent. And I don't think that is the right approach. I mean, if there's mothers watching this or fathers watching this, I think that is that is the conversation that you need to have with your children, that making a choice that works for you is not selfish. It is self-interest, because that will help you feel better about yourself. It'll probably help you feel more wholesome as an individual. It'll give you a different dimension besides just one dimension that you spend your time so focused on. So I think it's important that we prioritize ourselves, we prioritize what we want as individuals, and I'm starting to do that now, little bit, or much more than I have for the last 20 years, and I think I'm better for it. So again, it comes back to the conditioning in our heads, and it's reorientation. It is not something that you can snap your fingers and suddenly wake up the next morning and say, I'm just going to go out there and make choices for myself. And I think it's a process. And I think it's also important that while you're on this journey to actually have a conversation with the people who you care about and who care about you, and explain why you feel a certain way or what you would like them to do for you, etc. And I think that is certainly something that would help, and certainly something that we need to do much more of, whether in our personal spaces or in our professional spaces. Very often in organizations, and especially in large organizations, we don't really have conversations about outside of that 360, appraisal process of what is it that you want for yourself as an individual. Where do you see yourself in terms of your worldview, in terms of your life's choices? And I think if there's a little more humanity in that process, as opposed to just, here's your KRA and this is what you delivered or you didn't deliver, I think there's a better appreciation and understanding of getting to know each other as people. I think that we would probably have a happier workforce and a much more committed and inspired workforce as well. And I think it comes back down to leadership and leaders sending out that message as well, that, I'm very clear, and I keep telling my team that I don't want robots here, putting stuff into a computer. I want thinking individuals. I want individuals with feelings, and come to the table with that, come to the table telling me how you feel, and let's see what we can do about that. So I think if we see a little bit more of that happen within each of our workplaces, I think we'll all be better for it.
It's very profound. Thank you for sharing that, Shereen. I think just the kind of questions that we wanted to ask you. I guess we've sort of covered all of that. We just have a few questions from the audience. We probably have another 5 minutes. Maybe take one or two of these. There's an interesting question on what needs to be done to unlock female entrepreneurship potential in India and to encourage more women to start their own enterprises. Yeah, and I think this is an area where you've done a lot of work helping. So yeah.
Yeah, you can watch my show tomorrow at 5 o'clock to start with. No, but that plug aside, I think a couple of things are important. I think one, of course, just the ability to let women make their own choices. I think that's important. I think getting them access to capital, getting them access to funding is important. What we are also seeing much more of today is the need to actually look at maybe dedicated funds that will fund women-driven businesses, because let's again be very clear, while we want to believe that ideas are ideas and funding should be merit-based, etc., many of the female entrepreneurs that I've spoken to, many of the startup founders that I've spoken to, say that there is a bias when it comes to funding, and this is borne out by data as well. For the same kind of business, female-driven businesses or female founders find it very hard to raise the kind of money that the men are just so readily raising. And then it comes back down into the networking system. I mean, let's be very clear, the boys club exists and it's alive and kicking and thriving. And so to again acknowledge the fact that, how do we ensure that there is a network for women to access that can help with mentorship, that can help with funding? So people like Mani Kola, etc., have actually launched women-dedicated funds. So, hopefully we will see much more of that. But again, as I said, there's no easy answers to this. It really will come back into the way that, we have the education system is structured, how we deal with patriarchy, and how that impacts a woman's ability to make her choices, and then of course operational issues like funding, etc. And I think the government also needs to perhaps do a little bit more from a policy point of view. And the World Economic Forum, in fact, in its latest gender gap report, made it very clear that especially in a post-pandemic world, policymakers, organizations need to use a gender lens. Because again, if you're talking about the skills of the future, then, ML, AI, data science, you're already starting to see the gender gap widen, because these are spaces that women are not actively participating in, are not getting skilled in. So you're going to, in fact, if you don't do something about this issue, you're going to have a future where the gender gap is going to get worse, not better. So, when you think about the future and you think about the skills for the future, how do you ensure that women are actually getting access to those skills, etc.? That's also a policy challenge and a corporate challenge that needs to be addressed.
Sure, thank you. Probably a quick one more question, that from your vantage view, how do you see the corporate ecosystem evolving in the next 5 years? What should we expect women in India in? It's very vast, but yeah, so over the next 5 years.
Well, I just hope that we see more women, in different roles, and hopefully in leadership roles as well, and more so. I think I hope that organizations spend a little more time on thinking about attrition and how to actually keep the attrition low, especially when it comes to the female workforce. And I hope that organizations spend a little more time thinking about how you can open up the pipeline. It's a very slim funnel already. How do you open up that funnel? I think that is going to have to be something that I hope that everyone is going to spend time thinking about. I mean, as Ashu was pointing out, Citi has set goals in place in terms of where you want to be, in your diversity goals. And I think more and more organizations are starting to do that, are starting to say that, look, this is how, if we're doing campus recruitment, then we have to ensure that there is more balanced representation. Or if we're, opening up a position, then we again need to ensure that we are at least interviewing women as part of that opening as well. And as far as us in the media, I think that what I'm hoping to do much more of is to have more balanced representation. I mean, I'm very clear now that we need to try and ensure that we don't have an all boys panel and all men's panel, and that's what we're so used to. But we need to make a little bit more effort. I can't believe that there are not enough women with opinions and voices who need to be heard. So I think each one of us has to just do our little bit and make the effort in whatever way we possibly can to ensure that we do have more equal and more inclusive workplaces, and that of course includes having more women in the workplace as well.
Great. Thank you, Shereen. I think this conversation was very engaging, very powerful thoughts, I must say. And the passion is the same as we have seen you on television for so many years. So I can very clearly see that some of these are very close to your heart, and you're personally doing stuff to make a difference for women in the workforce and in life in general, right? So thank you again for coming onto this platform, sharing your thoughts with Citi bankers, and hopefully, these initiatives will ensure that the next generation of women who come into the workforce, we are able to create a better platform for them. I just want to kind of thank you. Any last thoughts before you wind up? Anything that you want to share?
No, I think I'm just going to end, Ridula, with something that I know that most women will resonate with. we need to be gentler on ourselves. And I think we're very hard on ourselves, and we're constantly sort of, I mean, I know that I go through this process all the time. I'm constantly judging myself, forget about the rest of the world. But I think we need to be gentler on ourselves for certain. And I think we just we need to encourage each other. I'm a big believer in sisterhood. And I think that, strong women should go out there and support other women and look out for other women. And I think the men need to be part of this, because you've got wives and sisters and daughters, and you want to ensure that that it is a better world for them. I mean, for too long we have accepted a world that treats women poorly, that treats women badly, and I think it really is incumbent on the men, and especially men in decision-making roles, in positions of power. You've got to use your positions of power to do better and to do good. And it's not just about money. And I don't believe that it can just be about money any longer. And I think it's in your self-interest as well to ensure that we do have a much more equal world, not just workplace, but a more equal world.
Yes. Thank you, Shereen. Again, I just probably want to end one of the quotes which I had read, which is so, I think, so relevant, right? It basically says that we don't need to make women strong. They have a lot of strength. It is just about changing the way that the world perceives that strength. I think this year's IWD theme, Breaking the Bias, is a lot about that. It's about breaking the conscious and some unconscious biases that all of us have, largely with respect to gender in workforce. So I just hope that this interaction that we've had helps all of us look at some of those concepts in a slightly different way. I want to take this opportunity to thank Ashu for his sponsorship, for flagging off the IWD week, for everyone who organized this event, and for all the participants. And finally, Shiri, thank you so much for being part of this event and sharing your thoughts with us. It's always nice to see you. And it was even better interacting with you in a different, as I said, role reversal. So I've learned a lot and I've enjoyed a lot today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Midla. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you and your colleagues the very best. Thank you so much for having me part of this today.
Thank you.